Hello everyone, I hope you had an amazing day. Today I'm going to share more thrilling stories with you. But before we start, please leave a like and subscribe so I can help you fall asleep again in the future. Also make sure to comment at what time of the night you're watching this video. Now, let's get into it. Man in Mask, real story. When I was around 8 years old, my parents went out and left me alone at home. It was very common at that time for them to leave me alone at home, especially because I was a very responsible child. But that changed that day. It was May 24th, 2015. I was at home. It was around 10 p.m. I was watching a horror movie on TV. I liked the feeling of fear. I started to feel a sensation that someone was watching me. I looked out the window and saw a tall man dressed in black with a mask and a cap. I was paralyzed. I looked at him for a minute, and he looked at me, but suddenly he ran to the front door. I stayed calm because I knew the door was locked, but I heard the sound of glass breaking, and I already knew it was the window. I ran to my room and stayed there and started to hear him opening the doors of my house. You could feel the force with which he opened the doors, because every time the door opened, you could feel the house shaking. When he arrived at my door and saw that it was locked, he started kicking the door, and I started crying, asking him to leave. I didn't have a cell phone at that time, so the brilliant idea I had was to jump out the window. I jumped out the window and ran to my neighbor's house, who was a good friend of my parents. I knocked on her door, desperate, crying. When she opened it, I told her everything that had happened and asked her to call the police. She called the police and my parents. And the part that traumatized me the most was what the police said. They said that when they got there, they found the suspect in my room, with the door completely broken down, holding a knife in his hand. Imagine if I hadn't jumped out the window. Maybe I wouldn't even be here to tell this story. After that, I spent a year going to a psychologist every week. It's been almost 10 years since this happened, and I still see this man in recurring nightmares. Second story. My parents had one strict rule: never look out the window after dark. They always spoke about it in hushed tones, as if breaking this rule would invite something dangerous. As a child, I followed it without question, chalking it up to their quirks. But as I grew older, my curiosity began to gnaw at me. Why was the window forbidden? Tonight, I decided to find out. The house was still, except for the occasional groan of the floorboards. My parents were asleep, their bedroom door closed. I sat on my bed, staring at the curtain covering the window, the fabric shifting gently in the faint breeze. What's so dangerous about it? I muttered under my breath. With shaky legs, I stood up. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I approached the window. Part of me screamed to stop, to crawl back into bed and forget about it. But I couldn't. I reached out and slowly drew the curtain aside. At first, there was only darkness. I blinked, my eyes adjusting. I could make out the faint silhouette of trees at the edge of the yard, their branches swaying lazily. It seemed ordinary. I sighed in relief, and then I noticed it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line. My breath hitched. It wasn't human. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its movements erratic and jerky, like a puppet on tangled strings. Its pale skin glowed faintly, and where its face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface. I tried to step back, but my body wouldn't respond. My hand gripped the curtain tightly as the figure slowly turned toward me. Though it had no eyes, I could feel its gaze piercing through me, heavy and suffocating. It cocked its head, almost as if puzzled. Then its face shifted. A line appeared where a mouth should be, stretching wider and wider, revealing rows of jagged, glinting teeth. And then it spoke. The voice wasn't audible. It echoed inside my mind, cold and cutting, like shards of ice digging into my thoughts. The words weren't in any language I recognized, yet their meaning was unmistakable. "I know you see me." I stumbled backward, the curtain falling back into place. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor. My hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. My entire body trembled, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring at the window, too scared to move. Finally, I crawled back into bed and buried myself under the blankets, praying for dawn. When the first light seeped through the edges of the curtain, I didn't feel safe, just drained and numb. I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents. I didn't need to. They noticed the way I avoided the window, the fear etched into my face. Now I understood. Something waits beyond the glass, and it's aware of us. Third story. Diary of a Japanese Resident. No hope. Hey, it's me again, Hiroshi Nakamura. I'm not even sure why I keep writing this. Maybe it's the only thing holding me together. It's been more than a month since my last post. Back then, I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I've seen too much, and the person I used to be feels like a distant memory. Writing this feels like tossing a bottle into the ocean, hoping someone finds it before the waves swallow it. The power and internet came back a few days ago. At first, I felt a flicker of relief, a glimpse of normalcy in this chaos. But it's not normal. The connection is unstable, and every time I check a website, the same message appears. The situation is under control. Remain calm. Stay indoors and await further instructions. It's a lie. I know it is because I've seen what's out there. The streets are deserted, the buildings abandoned, and at night, the air carries distant screams and gunfire. Whatever control they claim to have is slipping through their fingers. When the power first went out a month ago, panic spread like wildfire. People looted stores, turned on each other, and turned the streets into battlegrounds. I stayed inside, locked the doors, and sealed the windows. My wife, she was still with me then. She seemed fine, or so I thought. But she began to change. She stopped talking, stopped eating. All she did was sit by the window, staring into nothing, her lips moving like she was talking to someone I couldn't see. 2 weeks ago, soldiers came to the apartment. I'd heard their heavy boots echoing in the hallways before, but this time they stopped at my door. They shouted for me to open up, and before I could answer, they forced their way in. My wife sat in her usual spot, unmoving, her skin pale, her eyes red and vacant. I tried to explain, begged them to leave us alone, but they weren't listening. One soldier saw her and raised his gun instantly. The soldier nearest to her hesitated and glanced back at a man in a hazmat suit who appeared to be in charge. The man nodded, and the soldier stepped forward, trying to assess her. That's when she moved. Faster than I thought possible, she lunged, her nails tearing through his suit. Then her mouth, God, her mouth. Black, writhing things poured out, thin and serpentine, reaching for his face. He screamed, stumbling back as another soldier fired. The shot hit her square in the chest, and she crumpled to the floor. The room fell silent except for the soldier's heavy breathing. The man in the hazmat suit barked orders, and they dragged her body away without a word. They didn't ask about me or check if I was infected. They just left, leaving the door wide open. I locked it, but it felt meaningless. They had already taken her. The woman I loved was gone. Since then, I've been alone. Days blur together, nights are unbearable. I ration what little food I have, expired cans, stale crackers. I don't trust the bottled water I scavenged. Instead, I collect rainwater, boiling it on a camping stove. It's barely enough to survive. The internet is my only link to the outside world. I found forums filled with others like me, sharing their stories. A man from Osaka described his brother drinking tap water and walking into the ocean. A woman from Sendai talked about black tendrils emerging from storm drains. The posts are fragmented and desperate, and nobody seems to have answers. The official news hasn't updated in weeks. The silence from the government is deafening. That comment from that beautiful sound still lingers in my mind. He said it might already be too late for my wife, and he was right. He might be right about everything. The water isn't just contaminated, it's changing people. I don't know how or why. I've seen it myself. Those black, writhing things from her mouth, they moved with purpose, like they were searching for something. Parasite, disease, curse, it doesn't matter. It's spreading, and nobody knows how to stop it. Last night, I heard something outside my door. It wasn't footsteps, but a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing. The noise didn't stop. It moved back and forth, circling my apartment for hours. I didn't sleep. I keep wondering if I've already been exposed. What if it's inside me, waiting? Is that why the soldiers didn't ask questions? Why they didn't take me with her? Maybe they already knew. Maybe they're letting it play out. Tonight, the lights flickered again. The internet cut out briefly before coming back. I'm writing this while I still can. If this is my final entry, let it serve as a warning. Stay away from the water. Don't trust it. Don't trust anyone who's been near it. And if it's already too late for you, I'm sorry. I don't think any of us are getting out of this. Fourth story, the Garden of Bones. As I stepped out of my car and onto the gravel driveway, a chill ran through me. It had been years since I'd visited my mother's remote farmhouse. The wooden boards of the house creaked under the wind, and the trees swayed ominously, their branches clawing at the sky. My mother greeted me at the door with a tight embrace, her smile thin and her eyes shadowed with something unspoken. I chalked it up to age and loneliness, but a subtle tension lingered in the air. At dinner, I noticed strange scratches on the wall and a faint metallic scent in the air. When I asked about them, my mother waved it off with a laugh, claiming she'd had a kitchen accident. Her humor felt forced, her eyes darting to the basement door as if expecting it to open on its own. Later, I walked to the village store for a drink. The streets were empty, the store eerily quiet. On the wall hung a flyer for a missing girl. The cashier leaned in, whispering, "Her family thinks your mother might know something. She was seen near your mother's property." I returned to the farmhouse, my unease growing. My mother denied everything, her voice rising, but her words sounded hollow. That night, I was awoken by a faint whisper and a soft creaking sound. Following it, I found myself standing at the basement door. The air grew colder as I descended the steps. Shadows danced in the dim light of a single, flickering bulb. My breath caught as I saw a pile of bones partially buried in the dirt. Among them was a fresh bouquet of flowers, just like those in my mother's prized garden. The whisper returned, clearer now. She shouldn't have touched them. I turned to see my mother standing at the top of the stairs, her eyes reflecting the dim light. Her voice, low and trembling, carried an edge of madness. "She ruined my garden. She had no right." The floor shifted beneath me, and I stumbled, catching myself just before falling into the pit. My mother took a step closer, her silhouette larger than it should have been. "You're just like her, always questioning, always prying." I tried to reason with her, but her laughter echoed, hollow and chilling. "You'll understand soon," she said, stepping back into the shadows. The next morning, I woke in my car, parked in the middle of a field. My mother and the farmhouse were gone, as if they'd never existed. The village store was boarded up, the missing girl's flyer faded and torn. But as I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing where the farmhouse used to be, holding a bouquet of flowers.